Hi, this is Amanda Dundas with People at Work. I'm speaking today with Jerry Seibert, Executive Consultant at OrgVitality, who led our effort to provide organizations with a free employee well-being and business resilience survey in the weeks after the full force of the pandemic became clear. Today, he will share our findings. Jerry, thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks, Amanda. I appreciate the opportunity.
So, can you tell me, why did OrgVitality release a free survey?
Yeah, well, when the severity of the pandemic began to become clear, we knew that one of the greatest challenges organizations would face would be keeping in touch with employees, especially as their work shifted in so many cases from on-site work to remote work. I mean, knowing what employees needed in terms of resources and support, understanding if critical messages from leadership were getting through, these are things that can be very difficult to keep track of in a crisis. And we also knew from work we did during past crises that the impact on the mental health of employees, the stress of the situation would be significant, and that there would be all sorts of impacts for individuals and for organizations. Our larger clients had the means and resources to conduct pulse surveys and maintain that connection with their employees, but we knew many other organizations would not, particularly smaller and nonprofit organizations. So we felt that making, a good quality survey designed by industrial organizational psychologists and all that, and making it available to any organization that needed it, was something that we could do to help during the pandemic. I mean, really, it was an ideal way to bring our particular expertise to bear. And we really were thrilled with the uptake of the survey. The organizations that made use of it ranged from a global pharmaceutical company to tiny neighborhood animal shelters. In fact, we had made a special outreach effort to nonprofit organizations, and quite a few of the companies that made use of the survey were nonprofits. And really, those are organizations that probably could not have conducted a survey in any other way. So we feel good about that.
You surveyed close to 60,000 employees across various industries. What are some of the key findings?
I think most people would be surprised by just how positive the results were overall. The employees almost overwhelmingly felt that their organizations were responding effectively to the crisis, which, I don't know, I think just from watching the news, you might not have expected that to be the result. But, on average, 92% believed their company was doing a good job responding to the crisis. And senior leaders got pretty high marks as well. We had a number of questions about senior leadership, and over 90% of employees really believed that senior leaders were prioritizing their health, the health and safety of employees and their families. And I think it was like 93% felt that senior leaders had responded very quickly to the crisis. So in general, where some people might have expected employees to be very distressed, what we found is that they perceived their employers to be doing the right thing, to be doing it well, and to be doing it quickly.
What surprised you most from the survey results?
There were a lot of interesting findings from the survey. And first, let me say that while employees generally thought their organizations were responding effectively, that does not mean that they had no issues. For example, quite a few were having difficulty managing their work and personal demands. Particularly in March, April, and May of this year, people were really struggling to adapt to new ways of working. Being a remote worker and also trying to manage a family with children who are no longer, attending school. I mean, that's a huge challenge. And, we read about it and seen it on TV. It's gotten a lot of press. But for the participating companies, the survey helped them understand, exactly how severe that issue was with their workforce, and whether or not there were particular hotspots in the organization where additional resources might have been needed. And of course, not all employees were working from home. I mean, in healthcare, in grocery stores, and other industries, employees still had to report on site for work. And what we found was that in most of the questions in the survey, there were not huge differences between employees working from home versus those still working on site, but there were some, and I think they were key. For example, employees who still had to report for work on site um, were much less likely to feel that their health and safety was being prioritized. They were also less likely to feel that they had the tools and resources that they needed, and that may have reflected to some degree the struggles everyone was having at that time with obtaining personal protective equipment, um, or how much time it was taking to set things up, like plexiglass shields between cashiers and customers, those sorts of adjustments that we've all started to get used to now, but that were all being figured out, in those first few weeks and months. We also found that customer-facing employees in general were much less favorable than their responses. And that wasn't simply due to the fact that some of those customer-facing employees were still working on site, literally face-to-face with customers. That included people who worked over the phone with customers, or providing support services, other things like that. So even when we controlled whether those employees were working from home or on site, there was still a major gap between customer-facing employees and other types of employees, like customer support functions or operations and production employees. Customers were also very stressed by the pandemic. So if you're struggling with all of those issues yourself, and then your customers are also stressed, right? I think the interactions were probably much more likely to be difficult interactions than maybe they were on average pre-pandemic. So, and put yourself in the shoes if you were in a call center, right? But now you're trying to do your work from home, and you've got, kids and family around you, and probably, not a system that's not functioning as quickly or effectively when you need to pull up customer information. I mean, there's just, I think, extra challenges that went along with those roles that were unique to those roles. Another interesting finding we found was that nonprofit organizations, which often operate on a shoestring, really were struggling more than for-profit organizations. And while their staffs were still, majority positive, they were more likely to have concerns, especially with their ability to keep working in terms of having needed resources and being able to collaborate effectively, those types of things. And while their confidence in their leadership and the effectiveness of, say, leadership communications was a bit lower than what we were seeing in the corporate world, it was interesting. They still had confidence that their organization would make it through to the other side of the pandemic.
What would you like to see leaders take away from these results?
Well, they should be reassured that employees have seen and appreciate what they've done in response to the pandemic. In fact, I would say that both corporations and nonprofit organizations should feel pretty good about the agility that they've shown in the face of this crisis. And it's truly been a unique situation, and I think the way that they've adapted really is impressive, and they should feel good about that. But they can't take this situation for granted. The fact is that in a crisis, people will tend to rally around the leadership and rally around the organization. We saw that after 9/11. We saw that after the financial crisis in 2008. So to a certain degree, the high scores that we saw, in the employee well-being and business resilience survey, would have been influenced by that tendency. So in a way, you could say the results might not have been fully, quote, earned, close quote. And in the past, we've seen that high scores, during and immediately after a crisis, fade over time post-crisis. So you could think of these high scores as only being on loan, if you will. If organizations don't work to maintain them, they're not going to last. So it is absolutely essential that organizations stay focused. There are a lot of challenges and there's a lot of change yet to come. So there's no coasting now. The intensity of the response that organizations put forward in the past months really has to be kept up. And it's becoming clear that even after the pandemic is behind us, there will be new ways of working. All of the implications and repercussions won't be clear, for quite some time. So maintaining that level of agility that's been shown to date is going to be really important moving forward.
What should organizations be doing now as the pandemic continues to evolve?
Yeah, well, what organizations are finding is that the pandemic is not, in fact, winding down. As you said, it's evolving. And right now, it's entering a new phase of intensification. So companies, as I said, they need to continue to be very agile in their response. Any return to the old ways of doing business or efforts to return to that, have to be tempered by local conditions. For large organizations, there's very likely to be places where, on-site work can start up, while in another location, they're perhaps looking at doing new furloughs. And remote working will have to continue or even be restarted in some cases where they might have started to bring people back on site. So, an important part of that agile response will be to continue communicating clearly with employees and really listening to their concerns. The best organizations are continuously gathering feedback so that they understand the concerns of employees and how those concerns might differ from one location to another. When we released the Employee Wellbeing and Business Resilience Survey, we hoped that it would help companies with that sort of listening and responding. The feedback we got from participants, the participating organizations on whether that was effective or not was really overwhelmingly positive. And in fact, we were inspired to design an entire series of surveys that organizations could use throughout the evolving pandemic. Just like the first one, we're making these available, at no cost to any organization that needs them. These are not just for clients. But we've set up a website where people can sign up and get access to this suite of Pulse surveys. And they can use, the survey or surveys that fit their needs. When they do so, they get results on a secure web page and they can view them in real time and, download them for internal use, that sort of thing. And there's surveys that, for when you're getting ready to reopen, for when you're in the process of bringing people back on site, Pulse surveys to get feedback on how well, a safe workplace and safe work processes are being maintained. There's even one for virtual teams to use, right? So you've got managers who now have teams that never get together for face-to-face meetings. That's a different, requires a different sort of managing than, other types of teams. So we're making this suite available at no charge. We truly believe it is the right thing to do at this time. And we think they can have a real impact for companies that use them.
That's all we have time for today. Jerry, thanks for being here. Our full report with the survey findings is available on our website at OrgVitality.com. There, you can also find more information about our free suite of Pulse surveys, including registration information. Until next time, thanks for joining us.